I'm just going to test this to see if I'm actually broadcasting, because I've already done this once and it didn't work. So, okay, I think it's working. Cool. All right. So, welcome to our first video lecture. And of course, this is on Chapter 1, Theme 4, Climate, Weather, and the Environment. So, of course, most of us have heard the statement, if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute. Chances are it will change. And yes, of course, it's going to change because it's weather, because you need to know the difference between weather and climate. Weather, you can look outside your window like I'm doing right now, and it's after 9 o'clock on Thursday, and it's sunny, and it's in August, and I can predict that it's probably going to be really hot. That's because I know what our climate is like in August. So again, you need to know what the difference between weather and climate is. They're definitely related, but there is a difference. Weather is the outside conditions happening right now. Climate are outside conditions happening over a year. And why is that important to Arkansas history? Is because our weather and climate affect us and in fact affect the environment. So just so you know, that's what we're talking about. And that is our essential question for today. How does nature interact with Arkansas's people and places? That's what we're going to look at. So again, we watch the weather probably daily on a daily basis, so we know what to wear. So we can kind of guess if we've been here for a while. In August, September, it's going to be pretty warm, so I'm going to dress accordingly. And weather can come in a lot of different forms, of course. Temperature. Hopefully you know what that means. The amount of heat in the air or in the atmosphere. Precipitation, and there are many forms of that, right? Rain, sleet, snow, hail. I think we got that all. 4 forms of precipitation. And of course, wind is a variable for weather. Is it windy? Is it not? Is it breezy? What? So again, our weather is not the same as climate. Climate is affected by lots of other things like altitude. How high are you in the atmosphere? Are we close to ocean level or sea level? Are we in the mountains? Well, that depends on where you are in Arkansas, right? So if you already know about the regions of Arkansas, we live in northwest Arkansas where there's mountains, or the Boston Mountains. And yes, it does have an effect on us. If you go to the Arkansas River Valley, it's a little warmer. Did you notice that? Excuse me. So in general, altitude affects climate. If we live near water, it affects climate. So if you live next to an ocean, it actually does affect the climate. Whereas if we don't live near huge bodies of water, it actually can change our climate. Of course, if you live closer to the equator, what's going to happen to your climate? As opposed to living far away from the equator, like at the North and the South poles, how does climate change? Think about that. So these are just a few things that affect climate. Now, Arkansas, if you look on a map, which we'll look at in just a minute, Arkansas is affected by 2 weather patterns. From the southeast, wind and temperature from the Gulf of Mexico, and then from the north and the west, mountain regions, we get really dry and cool air. So Arkansas is located in a temperate zone, which means we are close enough to the equator to have a fairly warm climate. So also the stable temperatures from the Gulf also help regulate our climate. So these 2 things are really important. So I downloaded a couple of maps all from the same time period, just to show you the differences and where our weather pattern is. Of course, here we are. Boom, boom, boom. Equator south of us. U.S. water vapor satellite. You can see how the cool, dry air is being pushed across this way, and warm, moist air coming up from the Gulf of Mexico. And we just kind of meet smack dab in the middle, which has a huge effect on this whole entire area. And if you haven't already guessed what this area is called, that affects us, we'll get to that later. So this is a water vapor satellite, so you can see where the water vapor is, a lot of moisture. And then infrared, where there's heat. This has a little more heat in it, more moisture, you can see here. And of course, where in the Doppler radar, where there's rain. And you can see how they all coincide with one another. It's kind of cool. We just happen to be smack dab right in the middle of what? Tornado Alley. We're in the perfect location for those two weather patterns to meet. So we've talked about weather, and if you've lived in Arkansas for any length of time over a year's period, then you kind of can gauge what our seasons are like. In our climate, we are a temperate climate zone. We don't necessarily have really extreme weather. Sometimes it feels like it, but it's not usually extreme. We have 4 distinct seasons. Some places have 2 seasons, a wet and dry season. And some places have like 1 season. But we have 4. So spring and fall are my favorites, just because of probably the more milder temperatures, but also because of the beauty that it brings as well. However, in the spring, we can experience thunderstorms and tornadoes. Basically, temperatures range from mid-60s to low 80s, and rains bring plenty of spring flowers. On average, we get about 44 to 54 inches of rainfall each year. But the Ouachita Mountains, which you should know where those are, receive the most precipitation annually. So, of course, as summer approaches and the school year ends, we become very hot and humid, especially in the Delta and the Gulf coastal regions, where it often reaches more than 100 degrees. So occasionally other parts of the state will reach 100, and I think Arkansas River Valley has already done that this year. I don't think Northwest Arkansas has yet. Humidity levels also rise during the later part of the summer, making the hot temperatures feel even hotter. And if you know what humidity is, it's the amount of water vapor in the air. So the hotter it gets, the more potential for more water vapor. So it's like going out, excuse me, going outside, and you could, if you've ever heard the phrase, you could cut the air with a knife, and it's referring to the humidity, and it's really kind of oppressive almost. It's really, you sweat a whole lot faster, and it's really, you just don't want to go outside. Whereas if you go in the same place into eastern Washington state and it's the same temperature, because of the mountains blocking all the moisture, it's a really dry heat. And that's what a lot of people will say. Oh, it's just a dry heat, so it's not as oppressive, and you can actually get things done in 100-degree weather on the eastern part of Washington state. So humidity is a huge factor. Now, if you go down to Louisiana or in the Gulf coastal areas of the United States, the humidity is much higher because where is it located? Next to an ocean. Good. All right. Fall in Arkansas usually rolls around by the last week of September, and a ton of people outside of Arkansas come to Arkansas just to see the leaves change color, especially in northwest Arkansas. Excuse me. Having some issues. By October, the temperatures drop into the 70s, which is the best, and the nights become crisp and cool. The cold season usually begins around December, officially December 21st, and Arkansas does receive some snow, but sometimes more than others. If you remember 22 days of snow a couple of years ago, sometimes we don't have very much at all. What we really contend with in northwestern Arkansas is ice. So we can dip below freezing for a couple of months. So in 1936, the town of Ozark, if you know where that is, hit a record 120 degrees. It's the highest temperature ever recorded in Arkansas. And the small town of Pond, which I have no idea where it is, holds the record for the lowest temperature in our state at a negative 29 degrees. Can you imagine? It doesn't say a year, but oh my gosh. That is crazy. And of course, in my lectures, I love to show pictures because sometimes, words are boring. So here is beautiful Northwest Arkansas during the fall. That's crazy. And it varies every year whether or not the trees will turn brilliant colors like this or if it just goes from green to brown. Depends on, again, temperature as well as amount of water received during the summer and so forth. Feast your eyes on that. And of course, while ice can be very beautiful at times, almost like a fairyland, that's what I think of, it can also be very dangerous, of course, with ice on the power lines, ice on the roads, or trees on the roads because of ice. I alluded to this earlier about the area in which we live is the perfect conditions with the dry, cool air meeting with the warm, moist air right in the middle where we live to produce tornadoes. Arkansas ranks third in the category of deadliest tornadoes, unfortunately. And if you've been here any length of time, you know that the most dangerous seasons for tornadoes are in the spring and fall. They can actually occur at any time of the year, but most commonly in the spring and fall. I lived in Oklahoma several years ago where a deadly tornado came through in February, the beginning of February. It was crazy. So basically, tornadoes form when a cold front collides with warm, moist air and the wind from the storm spins fast enough to form a funnel. Most tornadoes are less than 1 mile in diameter, but can easily travel across more than 50 miles of land. The Northwest Arkansas it has before gotten tornadoes, but because of the mountainous area, it's difficult for a tornado to cross. But if you go further south and east, it's a lot flatter and not a whole lot of obstacles in the path of a tornado. So in Arkansas River Valley and the Delta areas, potentially can have a lot more devastating tornadoes. So we, of course, are located in Tornado Alley, which also includes, from Texas all the way up to Minnesota. And our meteorologists are constantly observing tornadoes or Tornado Alley and using radar to predict the path. We have a lot more technology available to us to help do that, to predict when and where a tornado will strike. Excuse me. But, earlier, before that kind of technology, tornadoes could devastate people in the extreme. The deadliest tornado in Arkansas was in 1952, and it killed 111 people and injured over 700. Even though we have the best technology, it still can you know, if a tornado comes at night, which I think it was the case in Joplin, Missouri, a couple of years ago, which killed a lot of people, devastated the whole town. It's very difficult. You can't not have a tornado. There's no way you can stop a tornado. And so our meteorologists are using the best technology to predict, you know, and help evacuate us as safely as possible. Meteorologists also measure tornadoes on what's called the Fujita scale. And it measures the strength of a tornado. Category 1, of course, F5 is the lowest tornado rating, and it's based on speed, wind speed, 73 to 112 miles per hour. I'm sorry. And they typically cause minimal damage. However, F5 tornadoes are the most destructive type, with winds between 261 miles per hour to 318, and it usually wipes out everything in its path. In 1999, in January, and that we're in January, 56 tornadoes were confirmed across the state, breaking all previous records for a single outbreak. That was in one day. Maybe not in one day, just in January. Some of the hardest hit areas were in, again, Arkansas River Valley and eastern Arkansas, like Heber Springs, Little Rock, Jonesboro, Brinkley, Greenbrier. Hopefully you know where the safest place to be is in a tornado. Head for a basement or underground shelter, if possible, or in the house with no windows. So, do you know where the safest place is in our school? Or where you're supposed to go in case of a tornado? I hope so. Or ask me. Here are some pictures of tornadoes in Arkansas. This was in 2008. Looks like on Interstate 40. And of course, what can be left behind after a tornado occurs. All right, last little bit. Of course, weather affects us, our environment affects us, but we also affect our environment. So we have definitely changed the land for our use. And since the beginning of time, we have done that. We have looked at what the environment and our resources can give us and then how we can improve on that. So Native Americans, excuse me, use the Earth's resources to improve their lives, of course. And they had a very different outlook on how to treat the land than other people who came along, like Europeans. We tend to destroy more now than we have ever before. But one thing technology has given us is some really great benefits, but in some ways our technology has also harmed us as well. So it's really a balancing act on what can we use or what should we use, as opposed to let's just use whatever we want. So Native peoples basically were hunting and gathering. And then when Europeans came along and showed them farming or better ways to farm, you know, for irrigation and that kind of thing, and they had a different outlook on how to use the land than Native Americans did. And today we clear, plow, plant, and irrigate the Arkansas Delta and West Gulf Coastal Plains and in the Arkansas River Valley. So we, in every part of our history, we have used the natural resources in our environment to meet our needs. And again, that can be really helpful. Obviously, we live in a very different world today than 100, 200, 500 years ago. And that, you know, our comfort level is definitely better than some. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. Think about that. Could be both, right? So we affect our environment, but certainly the environment can affect us. So one of the biggest natural disasters in Arkansas happened in 1927 when too much rainfall caused flooding along the Mississippi and Arkansas rivers. This will be the last thing that we talk about. Then, of course, we can't do anything to stop a flood, but we can adapt to that. So, how do we prevent flooding, or how do we adapt to flooding? We create levees and dams to help protect our personal property and make the floodwaters flow differently. Also, storm warning systems have improved our ability to warn people of any approaching dangers like potential floods. So this picture down here is from 1927. And of course, that's going to definitely alter and affect us and affect these people's lives. Here's some others. Excuse me. So as you can see here, this is the same flood, 1927. This is not a natural levee, or if it is, they have definitely built it up, and you can see where people have escaped from their homes, their flooded homes, and lived up here until the waters receded. Just kind of crazy. So I'm thinking that this obviously is not the side of the river, but this is because perhaps, normally a steamboat wouldn't be able to get onto the other side. So I'm thinking this is the river on this side. And this is where the people lived on that side. It's crazy. Here's a better shot of it, closer. Just think about having to live on this strip of land for, I have no idea how long it took for the waters to recede. But you can see here, it looks like these waters are very still, like they're not moving, and that's actually really bad because stagnant or non-moving water can breed a lot of disease, mosquitoes. I mean, it's not good to have just standing water around. So that's one way the floods can affect you, and of course other ways, including death. So just think about how they had to pick themselves up after this and basically start over again. It's pretty incredible. Same thing with people who have been affected by floods today and tornadoes as well. So here are a couple of questions that I want you to consider about Arkansas and our climate, weather, and the environment. A couple things. How are weather and climate different? How are they the same? Kind of remember what two primary weather patterns affect the climate of Arkansas. Kind of remember what the Fujita scale measures. What area of the world do we live in that has a specific nickname that has to do with the weather? And think about the different ways that people have changed the environment to improve their lives. And on that note, can you think of the major way that we have altered the environment in Northwest Arkansas? Like if you wanted to go from West Fork to Fort Smith, how are we physically able to do that? How have we altered the environment to be able to do that? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or both? Dun, dun, dun. This concludes our lecture. I believe there's an assignment that is associated with this. Maybe, maybe not. So please check your Schoology assignment for any further instructions. I thank you.